Everybody's cool, everybody's happy. So I mean, basically, obviously, this is indexing nuts and bolts. So I mean, what we're going to do in this particular presentation is kind of go over adding an index, sharing an index, the different index configurations. I know some of you guys are already familiar with this stuff, but I wanted to start from the beginning, so that's what we're doing. So I mean, the first thing is adding an index. If you guys have never done this before, you need to go back to your desk and play with this. It's pretty simple. You know, you can follow these instructions, you can go to the admin guide, you can get this information from anywhere, but that's the gist of it. I mean, you basically go into DM Server Manager, Search Server Indexes tab, add index, set where you want the index to be built. One of the big catches, especially with eDOCS 10, is changing the default location. If you don't want it to be built to our default C program data OpenText DM indexes location, you need to change it at the default button in DM Server Manager. The reason is in 10 we use a UNC share for the indexes instead of TCP ports. So if you don't change that default location and you just build your index and deselect the default location and change it there, your share will not be set up properly. And that's one of the big catches in eDOCS 10. When users go to search, they can't get results because they've used a non-default location. But pretty simple stuff there. What is an index? I mean, this is basically what is indexed, rather. And I mean, a lot of people know this, of course. Profile and document type. That's how we determine what gets indexed. If the document type is set to index content, metadata, nothing, whatever, and also the profile form. So if you don't have it set up by doc type, I thought I had undone that, the profile can do it as well. Indexing process. User saves or creates a document, it gets put into the needs indexing table. The needs indexing table gets like a queue for documents to be indexed. After that, I thought I turned this off.
I think it's a slide by slide.
Yeah, I think you're right. Nope.
Set it and then
Yeah, there we go. So, as far as what gets indexed, like I said, we did that, the metadata or the document contents, and it's done through document type or profile form. This is what gets indexed. So a lot of people ask questions like, do subversions get indexed? Which version gets indexed? It's the most recent. So if you got 8 versions, only version number 8 is the one that's getting indexed. No subversions ever get indexed. It's only the most recent version that gets indexed. And then published documents and attachments. I mean, it has to be a specific type of attachment, so it has to be specified as indexable. So it's not just because you have an attachment, it's automatically going to be indexed. If you index a weird format, it's not going to get picked up. Indexing process, kind of went over this already with the user creates a document, it gets into the needs indexing table, and then the indexer obtains that information through the ODBC data source. And search server indexes the document, and then it's ready to be searched. Now, search server itself, you'll hear this a lot. People will mix up indexing and search server, and they use these terms interchangeably. They're really not. Search server is a component that is part of the DM server installation. It is a standalone thing sometimes, but for our eDOCS purposes, it's built into the install of DM server. So it is the application that is actually in charge of indexing documents. And what it does is it uses search term vectoring. So basically it grids out a document and figures out where each individual word is in that document and maps it. So when you go and run a content search for the word test, it knows that in this entire library, test is on document number 1 in this particular part and document 12 in this part and so on. So it can return a list of document numbers that have that search criteria. The main thing to remember here is The DYX and the ref file, I know some of you guys that aren't as familiar with indexing, basically those two files merge. This is what we call an index compression. So the DYX file and the ref file are actually what the users are searching. So when they're running content searches, it's actually checking the DYX and the ref for each component table. When a compression occurs, the merge of the DYX to the ref. So that's why we get those temporary files, which you guys have all seen, the RUP, RUPW, those temporary files are during a compression. If a compression hangs, you'll see temporary and collection files in the same component table, and that's no good. If a compression is running, that's completely normal and okay. If it's not, you should not see ref and RUP. But we can get into that a little later. So, I mean, yeah, this is just talking more about the index compression, as far as you can set it up to do manually or automatically. Obviously, I would recommend automatic, just because, I mean, technically, if you go look at the admin guide, it's saying DM administrators should monitor this, and if the DYX file gets over X size, you need to then go ahead and manually do a compression, but nobody ever does that. I mean, in a perfect world, if you had time to truly monitor this, you would be able to go in and say, okay, the ref's getting too large, let me do a manual compression. Yeah, and as far as compression, so the indexing of documents will stop during a compression, but users will still be able to obtain search results from anything that was indexed prior to the compression. So it's not like you can't get search results just because the index is compressing. That's a common misconception with a lot of the customers, is they think that if it's compressing, nobody can get search results, and that's absolutely not true.
Within DM Server Manager, you have the option to set compression to be at 2 a.m. in the morning.
Yep.
Is that a good thing to do?
Yeah, I mean, basically what that's going to do is it's going to go and check at 2 a.m. the size of that ref and DYX file. If it's over a few hundred megs, it will compress. But the index is not going to wait until 2 a.m. to run a compression. So even though you've got it set up in Server Manager to check index compression at 2 a.m., if at noon the DYX file is too large, it will go ahead and run a compression right then and there. So that's another thing I hear a lot of customers talk about is, we'll have it set to compress at 2 a.m. Why is it compressing at noon? Because it needed to. And I mean, there's no way around it.
Is that the 2,000 document?
Well, that would 2,000 documents would be a batch. So I mean, a batch of documents, when you're talking about periodic mode, a batch is 2,000 documents, and that's what gets indexed at a clip. It does not compress after each individual batch,
Okay.
unless you've reached the file size for the DYX and the ref file. If that ref file is large enough after 2,000 documents, it will go ahead and compress. But for that to occur, you would need some seriously large documents, like giant PDFs, for that to actually get big enough in 2,000 to cause a compression. But the two main index configurations is a local and remote. So in a local instance, you actually have a login server is the same DM server that the index was built on. In a remote, you've got multiple DM servers. One is used for the application, the login server. One is used for the indexer. So the big thing here is, you got to keep in mind when you're working with customers, are they in a local or remote? 90% of our customers run remote indexes. They very rarely actually have the index on the same server the users are logging into. But that's a great thing to start thinking about when you're grabbing an indexer ticket, is this local or remote index. So this is an example of a local. What this is saying is, you got a user, he's running a search, he's going to his login DM server here. The DM server goes through the ODBC data source to search server, gets said results, goes back through the data source back to the user. So it's all done through ODBC on a local environment. When you get to the remote index, you're actually got two servers. So user goes to his app server, it then goes through TCP. So when you share an index in this remote configuration, you're required to assign a TCP port. That's what that TCP port is for, is the communication between the login and the index DM servers. So, and again, once it hits the indexer, it still goes through the ODBC data source to search server, and then back through TCP to the user. In 10, this changes. In eDOCS 10, we no longer use those TCP ports because they're a pain. We decided to go with the UNC file share. So now it's going through that instead of actually using a TCP port to share out the index, which is why it's very critical when you're building a 10 index that you do not change that default location from the build. If you go into the default section and change it there, that's completely okay. It's when you go in and add index, deselect the default location and put wherever you want, you've now built a share to your default location even though you didn't build the index to that location.
How do you fix that?
You basically go back in and change the default location and restart everything, and it will pick it back up. The FTSVC ADM.exe utility, a lot of you guys know what this is. This is the TCP Port Manager for the remote indexes. So I mean, what this is, a utility is basically just to start and stop and monitor ports. So a lot of times when users or customers call in with index tickets, you know, there's really a couple main issues. I can't get search results, or nothing's getting indexed. With the FTSVC ADM, you can go in and troubleshoot the TCP ports. And there's also the 16547 port, which is what we call the magic port. And I mean, basically that has created a DM server installation, should not be deleted. And honestly, I think it should be started. There's a lot of back and forth on whether or not it should be started or not. I think it should be, because it's really what the is used for remote indexes. In a local index, you can usually get away with it not being started. But I've seen more and more, if that's not started, sometimes you can't actually start the index. So I would say that you need that port started.
So this all goes away with 10.
Yes, it does. And the other thing to keep in mind, if you're trying to change something, the setup client connector is grayed out. It's because the port's started. If you stop the port, you can do whatever you want to it. This is the actual FTSVC ADM.exe utility. So I mean, on the top screen here, you've got what it looks like by default, and you click the setup button and you'll see this bottom screen. And I've got 3 ports listed here, the 10010, 10011, and the magic port 16547. This is definitely a big chunk of 531, 53 old school indexing issues. Is I can't get search results because it's not shared. If it is configured to be shared, the port's not started. So I mean, you just got to kind of go through systematically, and we'll go over that in the plan of attack of how to actually attack an index ticket and kind of logically, step by step, get you through and find where the actual breakdown is. This is just an example of one of the ports. So I'll later talk about the full create and full search paths. I mean, basically what this is just a path to the actual index collection. So you see Bad Dog is my library name, and then you start to see 183, which is part of my system ID. So this will change in every environment you go to. So it's not going to be constant, but it should reflect where the actual index collection lives. Sometimes these things will get goofed up and they'll have old information in the full create and full search locations, and it'll actually be pointing to an old index that no longer exists or is, you know, corrupt or whatever. So this is a good place to check when you're talking about the actual TCP port. And this is also a good reminder of the antivirus exclusion. Because we change file extensions in the index collection during compressions, most antiviruses view that as malicious activity and will lock files. That's a problem. So that's why we recommend that you do create an exclusion in antivirus to prevent that lock from occurring. The XLG log file. This is your indexer go-to for logging. If you have any questions about what got indexed as far as document number or, you know, why is it failing, the XLG log file is your best friend. So it's what you see when you go to DM Server Manager, Search Server Indexes, Properties of the Index. There's a log file tab that is the XLG. You can open it up from the collection, it's there as well, or you can go through Server Manager. But hands down, when you've got indexer issues, that's a good place to start looking, because there's going to be errors if it's not indexing, or if it's a text reader error, or whatever is going to be in that XLG log file. And it's also good if, you know, users are saying, I can't find my document, and you go in the XLG, open it in Notepad, and then do a search for the doc number. If it doesn't come back, obviously the document never got indexed. And the other log file that's going to be kind of handy is the component log files. So this is a screenshot of a component table, and it's the A component table. Most sites have multiple component tables. Obviously, I think I've got like 40 documents in this test environment, so it's only going to be one table, component table. This makes up one segment of the index. And for mine, it's only one because it's small. But in customer environments, you're going to have a lot. I mean, I've seen some that roll all the way back over to like 2Z. So it goes A to Z, and then 1A to 1Z, and so on. That is so I mean, you see there's gibberish and then A.log, A.dyx, A.ref. That's where I'm getting the A from. The rest of this is actually generated from the library name. So it looks like gibberish to us, but it's actually relevant. The reason that this can be a problem, if you build an index to a non-default location. So you specify, I want to go to C. Allen's desktop. And then later on you build another index and you set it to the same location. Since this is all based off library name, if it's the same library, you've got multiple collections in the same location, and that won't fly. So that's again why the default is pretty important. Content searches by users. This is pretty simple. I mean, basically they're going to search for documents, and they're going to do it in a couple different ways, either using the index for content or for metadata. And there's also wildcards and booleans, things like that they can use. And there's in the Using DM Extensions guide, there's a good section on searching and search operators that you can go and brush up on as far as what booleans do and how to properly use them. A lot of people like to use a tailing and leading wildcard. I highly recommend against it. It's a very open-ended search and generally returns way too many results, but some users still do it all the time. So this is just a connection issue for remote, which I'll go over later in the plan of attack as well, but I wanted to put it in here just to get you thinking about some stuff that you can do in a remote configuration. This is the local. So again, if your index is local versus remote, there's a couple steps that you're going to have to go through that are different for local versus remote. And that's pretty much the nuts and bolts of indexing. So do we have any questions? All right. So the next thing we're going to go over is the actual plan of attack here. And I mean, basically what this is my attempt, and like I said, it's kind of hard to give this an A or B, then C or D and E, because I mean, it's very, it's almost, you know, like a figure eight. There is no step by step, you can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and fix the problem. But there is a better way of attacking an index issue, starting here, looking at this, and kind of branching out from there, and that's really what this is. So the first question you got to ask yourself, and this is when you're on the phone with the customer, they're going to have one of really two issues. One, I can't find the document I'm looking for or any documents. Two, stuff's not getting indexed. So obviously A can lead to B, but not vice versa. So that's the first question you really need to ask yourself. Are documents getting indexed, or is this an issue where a user can't find a particular or any search results? If they're not getting indexed, you know, you've got it not indexing any documents or not indexing a specific document, and then there's a couple things to look at. You know, for the not indexing any documents, you want to check the service. Make sure the service is started. If it's not started, obviously you're not going to be able to index anything, and that's the Open Text Search Server FTMF service. That's in charge of the indexing. The confirm that the index is started. Unfortunately, in DM Server Manager, Search Server Indexes tab, the properties of the index, you'll see under Index Properties tab, there's an automatic and a manual startup for the indexer itself. So the service is probably by default set to start automatically at a reboot. The indexer, unfortunately, by default is set to manual. So even though the service starts, the index itself doesn't start. So what happens is, site will do a reboot, Windows update, whatever, and they'll reboot, and they'll come back in and make sure all the services are running, and then they will just forget it. And then 30 days later, they're getting calls from users about, I can't find my document, and they're confused as to why the indexer's been stopped for 30 days. And it's just because they never actually started it. So when you're setting them up, or if you're on the phone with the customer and you notice that the actual startup type for the index is manual, point it out to them and say, let's change this. Because it's only going to cause you problems. Unless you're just hardcore, you want to start it yourself, then that's fine. But I would definitely recommend setting that to automatic. Check the XLG log file for errors. If stuff's not getting indexed, that is an awesome place to go and look, because it's going to say, compression failed, or text reader error, or whatever the actual issue is going to be found in that XLG log file. That's basically the log file that says what's been indexed. The data sources not having a valid temp path. Remember, in our local and our remote indexes, the DM server is actually going through a data source to get to the search server. So if the ODBC data source temp path is not valid, and this happens for a couple reasons. The main one I've noticed is multiple admins remoting into the server adds a slash number. So it'll be like Alan's temp /2/3. That /3 is non-existent, same as /2. But if you don't have access to a valid temp directory for the data source, the index has nowhere to store temporarily files for search results or to be indexed. So this will happen, and you'll see it as not even necessarily we're out of space in this location, but an item limit. 65,000 items is a Windows setting. Can't have any more than 65,000 items in a folder. If you do, it won't write any new. So that's part of the reason you're checking the data source. Make sure it's valid path, so just copy it, paste it in the run command. If it's not valid, there's your problem. If it's valid, take a look and see how many items are in there. If it's over 65,000 or even getting close, a lot of times they're 0-byte files. They're not taking up space, but it's the item limit that you're running into. In that case, you just highlight a bunch and delete. And if it barks at you and says, hey, this file's still in use, skip it and go on to the next one. But the internal user account, this is another one I see pretty frequently. You should be using the internal user account with a few exceptions. If you're really tight security, you can actually set up a domain level password and user account for this type of behavior, and that's in another slide. But the internal user itself, password is actually displayed in clear text in the database. So if you're not sure, you get something that says, complaining about accounts or permissions, look at the internal user tab. The internal user is in docsadm.people, so if you go to the people table and look at the password, you can actually copy it from the database and put it into DM Server Manager internal user tab. A lot of times, admins have no clue this account even exists because it's just a local DM account. It has nothing to do with Active Directory, and they also have absolutely no idea what the password is for it. So you can always go grab it out of the database, put it in there, and that usually will take care of that type of an issue. If it's not indexing a specific document versus all documents, the XLG log file, the best thing you can do is open it up in Notepad, do an edit find for that particular document. If it doesn't display at all, obviously it never got sent to be indexed. So then you're looking at document types and profile forms to make sure the document was actually set up to be indexed. If it was and it errored out, then you're digging in the knowledge base for the error to try and figure out if it doesn't make sense. Like a text reader error is basically, the index can't understand that file type. So if you put a WAV file in and set it to index, it's never going to understand that because it's not a text file. And then also the needs indexing table. Sometimes stuff gets stuck for whatever reason in the needs indexing table. So you can always go over to docsadm.needsindexing and do a select statement and say, where doc number equals blah, and it'll return. And if it's there, you want to pay attention to the status. So there's 5 main statuses, but the status 1 is ready to be indexed, and after that you failed. So if you see like status 2, 3, or 4, that's basically saying that, I'm sorry, not the status, the retry count of 1 through 4. You get 4 tries to index a document. On the 4th failed attempt, index removes that document from needs indexing and basically says we tried, but we can't index this document. There's an exception to that. And there's a registry key that's on by default in 531 that basically will retain all rows as the registry key. And what it'll do is instead of removing the entry from needs indexing table, it'll change the status to 99, which basically means we tried and this failed, but we're going to leave it here so you as the admin can view what has failed. If it's something where the index is hung and you've got it started and it's working again, you can go back and simply change the status from 99 to 1, and it'll start back over and try to index them again. But that's the basic. Okay.
Hey, Alan,
Yep.
is the internal user used for anything other than the index?
Yeah, it's used for previewing, I'm pretty sure. So if like the preview generator, all that stuff uses internal as well.
Okay.
But I think that's it.
I mean, it's still basically just using the full text
Yeah.
indexer to generate previews. So.
So as the document is set to be indexed, we kind of went over this a little bit already. This is basically, you're going to check the document type. Document types are set to index content and metadata, metadata only or no indexing. So that's how most sites set up stuff to get indexed, is by document type. You can use profile form information as well if you want to change that drop down manually. In older versions it was a checkbox. The reason I really point that out is if you see that checkbox in 531 where it says enable content searching instead of the drop down, that means they did not update their doc type form, which is an issue, and they're going to need to go back and do that. And it's in the admin guide. They should have done it as a prereq before they ran table comp to 531, but it didn't happen, so that's an issue, because then we don't really understand how to interpret the content versus metadata with just the enable content searching checkbox. So I mean, that's one thing to keep in mind when you're talking about, troubleshooting a ticket with customer. If you're looking at their forms and they've just got the checkbox instead of the drop down, well, they missed a step when they upgraded, and they need to go back and fix it, because that's a problem.
Do we have to re-index everything?
No, you shouldn't have to re-index everything. Now, I mean, you can also go and look at the full text column on profile table will be set to Y for yes, P for profile, or N for no indexing. So, and the reason I point that out is if you have a large file, let's say you've got a 5 gigabyte PDF, it's going to choke the indexer. Anything over 4 gigs, you really shouldn't be indexing. It's just too large of a document. In that case, you would set it to index just the metadata. So it's just going to index the profile information for you, not the actual contents of the document. And also that comes into play when you're talking about upgrading an index to eDOCS 10, from 531 to eDOCS 10. Since all the content has been indexed, you don't have to re-index that content. You just need to re-index the metadata, which we're going to get into briefly later. But this is, again, the query for the needs indexing table. So if you're looking for a document and you want to go check the table, here's an example statement that really is all this is for. It shows you that you're in the docsadm.needs indexing table, and the FT system ID is the system ID of the index. So you got 2 main tables when it comes to indexing: FT indexes and needs indexing. FT indexes is just a list of your indexes and previewers. Needs indexing is just a queue for your documents to wait to be indexed. That FT system ID in needs indexing equals the system ID in FT indexes. It's also that same number you saw in the path where it's /library name /system ID. So that's how you get the actual system ID. If you're not getting any search results, so I mean any or an expected result, we're going to start with the any results. You ask yourself, is it local or remote? So is this an issue where it's just not communicating between the two DM servers, or is this an issue where you're having trouble actually communicating with one login and index server? Make sure the index is assigned for the library. I mean, these are some pretty simple steps, but if you can go through them, you'll usually knock out 90% of the indexing tickets because it's something silly that got overlooked, like you didn't assign it for the library. Also, remote libraries. So the first thing I do when I'm in with a user and they're saying, I can't get this search result, I put this criteria in and I don't find document 123, and I pull up document 123, and sure enough, that criteria is in there. You're looking, has it been indexed? So you check the XLG log file, and then also, is it assigned, and are you getting any error messages? So I got a slide in the tips and tricks that goes over some of the more common error messages, like no full text index configured for searching this library. What fixes it?
To assign it.
Exactly. All full text indexes are temporarily unavailable. The TCP port's not started.
Okay.
So I mean, that's in the tips and tricks, but I mean, that's definitely some of the stuff that usually causes the problem. I mean, 99% of the time, it's something real simple, like they didn't share it, they didn't assign it, a port got stopped. That's usually what causes indexing outages. And then for a specific user, they're not getting the expected results, make sure the criteria is present. I know it sounds silly, but they swear up and down that Jim Bob is in this document, and you go and look at the document and say, show me where Jim Bob is in here, and it's not.
And make sure that they have access to the document.
Right, of course. And then also, was the document indexed? So that's when you go back to the XLG log file, you're looking, make sure document 123 was actually successfully indexed, and then if it was, then it's more an issue with you're not getting search results than the document not getting indexed. But usually when I get a, hey, I can't find Jim Bob in 123, Jim Bob's not actually in document 123. So this is just the connection issues. We kind of breezed through this one in the nuts and bolts or indexing 102 PowerPoint. Basically, this is just a checklist for remote configurations. So you've got two sections here. From the app server or the login DM server, you need to check these things. And from the indexer itself, you need to check these things. So I mean, that's just kind of a step-by-step, as the remote indexing service started. So in remote configurations, you got the Open Text Search Server FTMF service. That is in charge of indexing. As far as communication between the login server and the indexer, yes, it uses a TCP port, but you also have to have that eDOCS DM remote index service running. Not the index manager, but the indexer service. The indexer manager is in manual and almost never needed. Confirm the DM server manager libraries have the correct index assigned. So I mean, like I said, that is a common one. The other thing to keep in mind is if you're talking about remote libraries, or you've got a customer site with 15 libraries and they're all using remote indexes, reduce the fraction. If they're having a problem finding a document in the San Jose library, but they've got San Jose and 15 other libraries they're searching, uncheck all the other libraries except for San Jose, so you're only working with one index at a time, if you can. That helps a lot, because I think that's a lot of the confusion, is you have all these different remote libraries and different indexes. You got 3 indexes for each library, and now you're up to like 30 indexes, and where do you start? Just reduce the fraction. Stick with the one library that they're having problems with, that particular index, that configuration, and if that's not it, you can move on from there. But don't just keep going through 15 different indexes trying to figure out what the problem is. And this is for the local. You got to make sure the search server service is started. You got to make sure that the library is, or the index is assigned for the library, that the index is actually started, and that shared, and the FTSVC ADM, the ports are started. This is all the same stuff over and over again. So here's an example, this is the XLG, what you're looking for, or what it can tell you. This is an actual example of the XLG log file. Notice I'm getting it through DM Server Manager, Search Server Indexes, Properties of the Index, Log File tab, open with Notepad, here you go. Get document for library blah, which is bad dog, failed for document number 25. And it failed because it encountered an unexpected error. I mean, really what that was a bad temp path, but that's an example of what you'll see. And it'll be blatant when you open this log file, there's errors. I mean, it's not going to be hidden, it's not going to be hard to find. That's definitely your best friend when it comes to indexing. If you still can't find it, this is the key for that, retain all rows. So the only problem with this key is if you turn it on after the fact, it's not really going to help you. So that's why it's on by default in 5.3.1, is that it's now on by default. So if they build an index and it skips 1,000 documents, they'll be sitting in the needs indexing table with the status of 99, and you can investigate why. If you do have problems building an index and they don't have this on for whatever reason, you'll have to turn it on and then create a new index. It's not going to retroactively go back and pick up all the stuff that got removed and change it to a status of 99. So it only helps really the build process. And that's really the plan of attack. So the next thing we got is the tips and tricks. Do you guys have any questions? No? Will, what you got?
You mentioned when they reboot and it doesn't restart for a month, the needs indexing table still gets filled with the...
Absolutely. The needs indexing table still gets populated with all the edits and creations of documents, and it just builds up waiting for the indexer to start. The reason I said it takes 30 days before they notice is because the recently edited documents list by default is 30 days. Most users are going to the red list for the last month's worth of documents. It's only after that time they start running searches to try and find those documents. So I see that a lot, and I chuckle because I tell customers all the time, I say, I bet it's been stopped for a month, and they're like, no way! And you go and look at the log file, and you're like, look dude, it's been stopped for a month or more. And they're like, how did you know that? Well, most users aren't searching for last month's documents.
I'm not sure how to ask this question, but it was a ticket that I worked with Broadbent where the files, the A, B, C, D files, they were stopping at a particular letter.
Component tables, right?
And then it simply wouldn't proceed. And stopping or deleting the index and starting over, it would either stop short of where it stopped previously, or it would go down a little further. Now, I know that's really vague, but...
No, what it sounds like is it's hitting a bank of documents. So even though it's not necessarily the exact same spot, there are some documents in there, my guess is they were very large, like 4 gigs or bigger.
Okay.
And what was happening is the indexer was choking. And so that's why, it wouldn't necessarily happen at the same spot each time, but that's why you're seeing that component table fail, and then it can never recover, because it's basically just threw up because it's too large of a file to be indexed.
Overfed.
Right, and I mean, as far as index component tables, if something starts going awry in a component table, you've all seen us hack it. We've all done it, where you go in and you manually change the temporary file to the collection file, and the collection file to .old or .to or whatever you want. That'll get you by for a little bit, but the more you do that, it's going to keep failing with time, and you need to really figure out the root cause. And unfortunately, there's not a very easy way to do that. The best way to truly figure it out is to build a bogus index, populate it with only that component table's documents. So to do that, basically each component table starts at a different document number. So if you got A, B, and C component tables, A is going to start with document number 1, B is going to start with document number 300,000, C is going to start with document number 400,000. Doesn't really matter, but that is in the vendor underscore specific information from the FT indexes table will tell you which document starts each component table. So what you would do in that case is basically populate just that component table's documents. So let's say it's document number 2000 through 4000. And you build an index and you just populate that index with those 2000 documents, and you build it in immediate mode. So it's going to do each document individually instead of batches of 2,000 in periodic mode. And then you should be able to determine with error messages and the XLG and the component.log what file is actually causing the problem, what doc number. And then from there you can actually fix the problem. Normally it's just documents are too large. They're not getting indexed because they're too big. And I mean, I see that occasionally, not that often, but that's usually the culprit is it's got a big file.
Where did you say that information is stored that tells you what?
It should be in the vendor underscore specific column of the FT indexes table. If you actually copy that out of the database and put it in Notepad, it's a huge string,
Oh, okay,
and it'll tell you which sections, document numbers start which component tables.
so that gets updated continuously
Yep.
as component tables are.
That's correct.
built.
Added or, yeah. Matt, you got anything?
No.
Well, then, I mean, the only thing I got left is tips and tricks. Do you guys want to take a quick break, or you just want to hammer through it?
Now, let's take a break.
Take a break, get some coffee, and then we will get started once we come back.